Before sunrise, Chicago was silent, the kind of silence that hides danger. Thick fog drifted across Little Village, the old brick streets glistening under the last traces of rain. Then, at 5:30 a.m., that silence shattered. Engines roared through the mist, blue and red lights slicing across the darkness as federal convoys rolled in. ICE tactical units, backed by Chicago Police, DEA, and Homeland Security, surrounded entire blocks from Cicero to Joliet. Doors splintered, flashbangs ignited, and commands echoed through narrow hallways. "Federal warrant! Hands up!" Families froze in shock, realizing this wasn't another patrol. This was Operation Midway Blitz, a massive federal crackdown ordered by the Department of Homeland Security after weeks of violent crimes tied to illegal migration across the Midwest. For months, the violence had crept quietly through neighborhoods. Overdoses, shootings, disappearances, until the city's heart finally fought back. Within minutes, entire streets were locked down. Armored trucks blocked intersections. Helicopters hovered low, their infrared beams cutting through the haze. To the agents, it was another dawn raid. But to Chicago, it was something else, a declaration. Because what began as an immigration sweep would soon expose a hidden cartel empire operating inside America's heartland. By the time the sun broke over the skyline, 4.3 tons of narcotics, 37 weapons, and a network of criminal cells would fall. And as the first light touched the smoke rising over the city, one truth echoed through every radio frequency. This isn't enforcement anymore, it's defense. At 5:30 a.m., the fog over Chicago's west side was ripped apart by the sound of engines and shouts. ICE tactical teams, backed by DEA special agents, FBI field units, and Chicago police, moved block by block through Little Village, Cicero, and Joliet. Doors shattered under battering rams, lights flashed, and orders thundered down the hallways. "Federal warrant! Hands where I can see them!" Families stumbled awake as armed agents flooded the narrow streets. What had begun as a quiet immigration sweep quickly transformed into the largest coordinated federal operation the Midwest had seen in a decade. They called it Operation Midway Blitz, a joint campaign designed to reclaim neighborhoods that had fallen under the grip of cartel violence and illegal networks stretching from Mexico to Illinois. Within minutes, dozens of suspects were in custody, men and women from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, some with years-long criminal histories, others freshly smuggled across the southern border. The agents moved with speed and precision, their training honed for moments like this. Each arrest fed into a greater puzzle, the pattern of a hidden infrastructure embedded deep inside Chicago's South Side. By 6 o'clock a.m., the fog began to thin, revealing what they had walked into, an urban war zone disguised as a neighborhood. Inside the first few houses raided, the scope of the operation changed instantly. Basements lined with ammunition crates, AR-15 variants wrapped in plastic, cash bundles sealed with Mexican banking tags, and digital ledgers scribbled in Spanish. None of it fit the image of a local drug ring. This wasn't street-level dealing. This was logistics, military in scale. In one abandoned living room, DEA chemists found barrels labeled Producto de Mexico, leaking residue that burned through the floorboards. Fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine were stacked like warehouse shipments. When the evidence team began weighing it, the numbers stunned even veteran agents. 180 pounds of meth, 62 kilos of cocaine, and dozens of firearms built for sustained combat. The walls of the command post near Midway Airport filled with photographs, addresses, and coded ledgers that connected the dots in real time. What began as an immigration sweep had just exposed a battlefield. By mid-morning, Homeland Security investigators realized that the targets weren't random. Each address, each name, matched an ongoing probe into the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, a powerful syndicate that had silently migrated north. Their presence in Chicago was no coincidence. Illegal migration had become camouflage, a human wave masking cartel couriers, money runners, and chemical suppliers. As the sun rose, agents stood outside shattered doors, watching the first daylight hit the smoke drifting up from the raids. Behind them, trucks loaded with confiscated weapons and evidence rolled toward federal headquarters. Above, drones captured aerial footage of neighborhoods that had been under siege without anyone knowing. In the command center, someone finally said what everyone had started to realize. This wasn't policing anymore. This was warfare disguised as enforcement. And as federal convoys regrouped under the rising light, a new directive came down from Washington: review every seizure, trace every signal, and prepare for Phase 2. The agents didn't know it yet, but what they uncovered that morning was only the surface of a far greater network, one built to exploit the chaos of migration, feed America's addiction, and turn the country's heartland into a battlefield hidden in plain sight. By noon, the evidence rooms near Midway Airport overflowed with chaos. Cash-stuffed envelopes, encrypted laptops still logged in, and phones buzzing with unread cartel messages. Investigators moved through the wreckage like archaeologists unearthing a secret empire. Every seized device told the same story: routes, payments, and coded orders linking the Midwest directly to Jalisco, Mexico. The analysts at Homeland Security pieced it together. The shipments hadn't started in Chicago. They'd traveled through Texas, up through Missouri, and into Illinois along trucking corridors disguised as migrant transport lines. Each driver, each warehouse, each transfer was mapped with military precision. What looked like spontaneous smuggling was, in truth, a logistics operation built on human camouflage. In one seized tablet, a conversation appeared in Spanish. Shipment confirmed, payment cleared. A simple exchange that tied Chicago's back alleys to the CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. It wasn't just narcotics. It was infrastructure. The drugs, weapons, and migrants all moved through the same arteries. A silent invasion masked by desperation. By afternoon, DHS analysts elevated the national threat level to Code Amber, an internal warning that meant the networks uncovered in Chicago could extend across state lines. At the command center, a cluster of monitors glowed red, each representing a location where digital signals converged. 5 hotspots spread across the south side and the industrial belt stretching toward Bridgeview. Each site matched a location seen on cartel chat logs. The directive from Washington arrived within minutes. Prepare for simultaneous strikes. In the underground briefing room, ICE strike leaders, FBI cyber units, and DEA tactical coordinators formed around a projection of Chicago's map. Red dots pulsed in rhythm with a server's heartbeat. Agents stared at the coordinates as tactical medics checked their kits, and helicopter crews calibrated thermal imaging systems for the upcoming assault. No one spoke. No one needed to. They'd all seen this pattern before. Cartel cells rebuilding faster than arrests could keep up. But this time was different. The chatter intercepted through encrypted apps showed real-time coordination, an enemy aware that its cover had been blown. A message from Homeland Security Command flashed across the encrypted terminal. Execution authorization imminent. Maintain dark. That meant the mission was about to go live. Across the Midwest, satellite uplinks watched the city from orbit. Drones scanned the neighborhoods where agents had struck hours earlier, detecting faint heat signatures beneath warehouses and garages. Engineers concluded what no one wanted to hear. The network hadn't fallen. It had shifted underground. By 2200 hours, the data analysts at Cyber Command traced a series of burner phone pings stretching from Laredo to Monterey, mirroring the communication nodes inside Chicago. It was the same pattern the CJNG used to move chemical precursors across the border. Encrypted bursts of data lasting less than 2 seconds each. Every transmission that night pointed toward the same 5 targets now blinking red on the Chicago operations map. Inside the command post, tension hung heavy. Radios buzzed quietly, the hum of generators drowned only by the ticking wall clock. Agents cleaned rifles and checked armor as briefing officers whispered updates over secure channels. The plan was simple: 5 targets, 5 teams, 1 synchronized strike. But everyone in that room knew simplicity ended the moment the first door blew open. Outside, the streets of Chicago's South Side lay empty under a pale orange haze. The storm was coming, and only the men and women inside the operations center knew how close it was. At 03:42 a.m., the encrypted message finally came through from Washington. All units, execute. The lights dimmed, engines roared back to life, and the city of Chicago, unaware of the war unfolding beneath its quiet dawn, braced for the next phase of Operation Midway Blitz. At 03:42 a.m., the encrypted order from Washington lit every terminal in the Midway Command Center. All units, execute. Engines answered like a heartbeat as armored convoys rolled into wet streets, flashlights cutting through fog, and a low-throated DHS helicopter took station overhead, its infrared painting ghostly red silhouettes on every rooftop. ICE tactical teams, DEA Special Operations, FBI Hostage Rescue, and Chicago SWAT moved in synchronized waves. Stack, breach, clear. Each operator knowing their lane, each radio call measured and calm. Echo 1, clear. At Target 1, Cicero, a steel door torn from its frame by a battering ram, a flashbang detonating into white noise, chemical vapors burning the air as agents poured in to face gunmen firing from an elevated catwalk. Muzzle flashes stitched across rafters. Automatic bursts met with surgical return fire. 2 hostiles collapsing where they stood, 3 others cuffed and hauled down the stairs. At Target 2, Midway Rail Yards, teams found a concealed tunnel cut into a concrete floor, a van with false panels, fentanyl pills disguised as candy stacked in sealed bins, encrypted radios and pill presses humming like dormant machines of war. A tactical medic treated a coughing civilian while evidence techs sealed plastic bags marked with case numbers. At Target 3, Brighton Park, resistance was fiercest. Reinforced chambers of concrete and steel, grenades rolled into stairwells, a SWAT medic dragging a wounded agent to cover beneath a rain of debris while breach teams cleared rooms with methodical discipline. The metallic patter of spent casings sounding like rainfall on linoleum. Across the city, teams hit 5 synchronized coordinates: warehouses, garages, a railside compound near Bridgeview, each location yielding the same signature. Boxes stamped with Mexican shipping codes, AR-15 variants wrapped in plastic, barrels labeled Producto de Mexico leaking chemical residue, money counters and stacks of forged passports hidden behind false walls. The forensic tables filled with 180 pounds of meth, 62 kilos of cocaine, and pieces of a logistics network built to move product and people en masse. Live feeds from overhead drones stitched the raids into a single frame. Armored trucks backing out through smoke. Agents shouldering evidence crates into vehicles. Helicopters pivoting to new coordinates as crews called in fresh developments. In the command post, the map pulsed. Red dots sinking as teams reported status. Target 4, heavy resistance. Target 5, secured. Radio chatter remained unnervingly calm. Names, check-ins, medical updates, evidence tags, the language of professionals doing dangerous work with precision. By first light, the tally was undeniable. 4.3 tons of narcotics seized, 37 firearms recovered, including 2 grenade launchers, and 15 suspects taken alive at high risk. Dozens more rounded up across the 2-week operation culminating in that dawn's strikes, bringing the total arrests above 98 as command consolidated custody streams and evidence flows to federal holding. Yet victory on the street revealed a deeper truth. Every device seized, laptops, phones, ledgers, traced back to the same arteries linking Jalisco to Chicago via Texas and Missouri. Burner phone pings mapped routes, encrypted chat logs confirmed payments and shipment windows, and forensic accountants followed the money to shell companies and laundromats that never washed a shirt. At one raid, a 19-year-old driver promised a visa for a $500 run, confessed he had no idea the refrigerated trailer held weapon parts and pill presses, illustrating how the cartel exploited desperation as cover. As trucks bearing evidence rolled toward federal warehouses, DEA chemists and FBI cyber teams began the long work of attribution. Chemical signatures matching batches seen in Texas, transaction patterns mirroring those used by CJNG networks, and financial seizures freezing nearly $12 million across 7 states. Outside, as armored vehicles receded and the smoke lifted over Lake Michigan, the city awoke to police tape and hushed neighbors, relief tempered by debate. Outside ICE headquarters, crowds began to gather, some chanting "families, not felons," while others held signs thanking the officers who had risked everything that morning. Inside the operation rooms, however, there was no time for celebration. Analysts warned that the cartel infrastructure had not been destroyed so much as disrupted. It would adapt, reroute, and attempt to rebuild using fresh faces and new covers. The directive from Homeland Security was already clear: expand the campaign into Indiana, Missouri, and Wisconsin, increase drone patrols over freight corridors, and marry border intelligence with deep cyber tracking. As the morning sun climbed over a city that had been wounded and yet remained standing, the men and women of Operation Midway Blitz understood the mission had shifted from a single raid to an enduring campaign, and that reclaiming the streets would mean following the cartel into the shadows where money, identity, and malice hid behind the everyday. By dawn, the adrenaline had faded, but the scale of what agents uncovered was only beginning to sink in. Inside the ICE command center near Midway Airport, the smell of burnt wiring and stale coffee hung in the air as evidence poured in. Crates of cash-stuffed envelopes, digital ledgers, and laptops streaming encrypted chats between operatives who had already fled. Analysts worked through the night, tracing names, serial numbers, and bank transfers. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Chicago wasn't just a transit point. It was a hub. The CJNG had built a parallel economy hidden inside the city's everyday life, using illegal migration not as movement, but as camouflage. The trail wound through auto shops that never fixed cars, laundromats that never washed clothes, and trucking depots with no deliveries recorded in years. Each business was a node in an invisible system. Money in, product out, silence in between. In dusty back offices, agents found old printers spewing fake invoices, shell company registrations, and ledgers marked with quiet loops of $50,000 or $80,000 at a time. The money never stayed still. It traveled through wire transfers and offshore accounts in Guadalajara, Mexico City, and Panama, dissolving into the digital ether before any one agency could catch it. What began as a drug raid had morphed into a war against an economic organism engineered for invisibility. During a late-night briefing, one FBI cyber specialist displayed a heat map glowing with thousands of tiny red nodes. Each dot, he said, isn't a dealer. It's a transaction, and they're all connected. The room went silent. The revelation struck hard. For every 5 migrants processed in the region, at least one had direct or indirect contact with cartel-linked employers. Some were paid in cash to drive shipments. Others acted as lookouts. A few simply disappeared. It wasn't chaos. It was design. The agents realized they weren't fighting traffickers anymore. They were fighting logisticians, men who treated people and drugs as interchangeable cargo. The CJNG Chicago network had evolved into something corporate. Contracts, timetables, and decentralized leadership insulated by poverty and fear. In one intercepted message, a mid-level handler boasted, "We don't smuggle, we distribute." That line became the key. Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, used it to decode patterns in seized chats. The algorithm exposed hundreds of recurring phrases: ghost line, blue invoice, quiet truck, shorthand for specific smuggling routes through the Midwest. With every new discovery, the agents felt the magnitude of what they had walked into. FBI cyber units cracked open dozens of encrypted devices, pulling fragments of conversations, GPS data, and photos of cash shipments hidden in cargo trucks. DEA chemists cross-referenced chemical compounds from seized barrels, confirming a match to fentanyl batches confiscated in Texas months earlier. A direct logistical link from Jalisco to Chicago. And when Homeland Security froze more than $12 million across 7 states, they proved that the cartel's digital banking arm had penetrated far beyond border towns. But even with those victories, the psychological toll weighed on everyone. One young ICE analyst, staring at a wall of data points, whispered, "They didn't just enter illegally. They adapted. They became ghosts." No one contradicted her. Because it was true. This was a network that didn't need to hide in shadows. It hid in plain sight, feeding off bureaucracy, exploiting laws written for peace, not war. Late that night, as agents filed their reports, a senior Homeland Security commander stepped into the quiet room and said what everyone was thinking. "We stopped their shipment, not their system." On the monitors, red lines connected Chicago to dots in Indiana, Missouri, and Wisconsin, a web expanding outward even as the raids ended. Operation Midway Blitz had drawn blood, but the enemy had already begun to reform. Chicago's streets were quieter now, but beneath the surface, data streams still pulsed like a heartbeat, encrypted, evolving, alive. And for the agents who had seen what lay underneath, one realization cut through the exhaustion. This wasn't about drugs anymore. It was about how crime learns faster than justice. 2 days after the raids, Chicago's silence broke again. Not with sirens, but with voices. Outside the ICE headquarters downtown, hundreds gathered beneath gray skies, clutching signs that read, "Families, not felons," and "Stop the raids." The same streets that had echoed with the thunder of armored trucks now pulsed with chants, prayers, and anger. The city that had just been saved was now divided. On one side, federal agents and their supporters who saw Operation Midway Blitz as a necessary strike to reclaim order. On the other, families, activists, and church leaders who believed the operation had crossed a moral line. Cameras crowded the sidewalks, reporters spoke in hushed tones, and through it all, rain began to fall. Soft, persistent, almost cleansing, as if the city itself couldn't decide which side it stood on. Inside a nearby church in Little Village, pews filled with families too afraid to go home. Mothers clutched their children, whispering names of relatives they hadn't heard from since the raids. A priest stood before them, his voice trembling. "We were told this was about criminals, but what if it was about people?" In those quiet rooms, the battle lines blurred. Some of those detained had no criminal record, no history of violence. Factory workers, students, fathers who'd lived quietly for years. Yet they were gone, swept up in a dragnet built for war. Outside, activists spoke into megaphones, their words carried by the wind. They said they were protecting America, but who protects the families left behind? For many, Midway Blitz became more than a law enforcement story. It became a symbol of fear and authority colliding. Yet, in the command center near Midway Airport, the mood was far from triumphant. Screens still glowed with new data. Phone pings from Indiana and Wisconsin hinted that CJNG cells were already shifting their routes north. To the agents, the mission wasn't over. It had just changed terrain. A Homeland Security spokesperson faced the press, their voice calm but sharp. "We don't choose who hides among criminals. We find them before they find more victims." That quote spread through the evening news like wildfire. Half the country applauding, the other half condemning. In Cicero, a bakery owner whose nephew had vanished during the operation told reporters, "I don't sleep anymore. I keep waiting for the knock on my door." Meanwhile, on talk radio and national broadcasts, the debate raged. Was Midway Blitz justice or punishment? Protection or persecution? Inside the ICE compound, agents worked quietly. Some scrolled through photos of their own families. Others rewatched body cam footage of the raids, doors breaking, lights flashing, commands shouted, and wondered if it had all gone too far. One veteran officer staring at the evidence wall muttered, "We don't get medals for this, just ghosts that don't fade." Around him, the word Phase 2 was already scribbled on briefing boards. Orders from Washington had arrived. Expand into Indiana, Missouri, and Wisconsin. Hit the supply corridors before they rebuild. Outside, the protests swelled. Choirs sang over police loudspeakers. A teenage girl held up a sign that said, "My father isn't a criminal. He just wanted to work." For a moment, even agents watching from inside couldn't look away. Chicago was no longer just a battleground between police and cartel. It had become a moral crossroads, a question about what safety really costs. By nightfall, as rain blurred the neon reflections of the city, two truths stood side by side. 1. Midway Blitz had saved lives, seized weapons, and crushed a cartel network embedded in the nation's heartland. The other, it had left a scar that would take years to heal. And somewhere between those two truths, America stood divided, between protection and compassion, justice and consequence. When dawn came again, protest banners hung damp on fences near the ICE facility, fluttering in the morning wind. Inside, the command room hummed with quiet determination. Whatever the world said outside, the agents knew their next orders were already written. Phase 2 was coming. As the sun rose over Lake Michigan, Chicago exhaled. The streets were still wet from rain, their reflections rippling beneath the glow of streetlights. The raids were over, the noise had faded, but the air still carried the weight of everything that had happened. Inside the ICE command center near Midway Airport, the night's chaos had settled into the low hum of machinery and the rustle of papers. Rows of monitors glowed in shades of red and green, each dot representing a lead, a suspect, or a life saved. Agents moved slowly now, their exhaustion hidden behind discipline. They weren't celebrating. They were processing what they'd seen, what they'd done, and what it all meant. On one screen, a live drone feed showed the skyline still cloaked in mist. Below it, a quiet message blinked. Phase 2, authorized. The war wasn't over. It was evolving. Operation Midway Blitz had started as a simple raid, but ended as a revelation. That cartel infiltration no longer stops at the border, and that America's defenses begin inside its own cities. Outside, the city stirred to life. Commuters stepping around puddles, children walking to school, unaware that just days earlier, those same streets had been battlefields. A senior Homeland Security official watched the sun cut through the fog and whispered words that no one else could hear. We're not just guarding borders anymore. We're guarding what it means to be American. The camera of history lingered on the quiet faces inside the command room. Men and women who had crossed a line between peace and defense, carrying both pride and doubt in equal measure. When the final report was signed, one truth remained written across the walls of the Operations Center. This wasn't just law enforcement. It was national defense. And as Chicago returned to its uneasy calm, another dawn waited on the horizon, one that would demand the same courage, the same silence, and the same resolve before the next breach began.